is Big Play Detroit. I am Chris Castellani. We got Austin Sisler on the sticks. We will bring him on here in just a minute. A jam-packed show this week that covers multiple sports. We had the Lions draft. We had the Tigers going through a very up and down mixed bag of a week, and we will discuss that in one of the later segments. But we are going to start off by talking about the Detroit Pistons. Now, by the time you are watching this or listening to it, there's a chance that Game 4 will be maybe even played, but maybe just tipped off, quite frankly, because they do play on Monday night against the Orlando Magic. But just to get you caught up, they are currently, as of the time of this recording, down 2-1 in this first round series. It is still first round, technically, because the play-in doesn't count. So first round series against the Orlando Magic, and I'm sensing a fair amount of panic in Pistonsville. And I think that it's probably fair. Now, they did play 2 games last week after dropping Game 1 last Sunday. The first half of Game 2 was kind of a mirror image of what we saw in Game 1, kind of a slog, close game. And then, this is a term that I've heard recently for the first time, and I'm going to start using it a lot, flow state. I feel like we saw Michigan basketball get into it quite a bit. The Pistons went on, I think, a 30-3 run, and the game was over. That'll do it in any league of basketball that you're playing in. Cade completely took over, but I just felt like in general they were maximizing their possessions in the second half, and they were moving the ball a lot better. I'm going to bring it up when we talk about Game 3, but I think that there's been a real issue with sloppiness, and you felt like after seeing the way that they really woke up in the second half of Game 2 that maybe that was an indicator of things to come. This is a 1 seed, but this is the first year in which they've really been kind of the top dog. Last year they came in. It was a nice story for them to be in the postseason. And then, maybe Game 1 or even the second half or first half, of Game 2, maybe that was the punch in the gut that they needed. And then they came out on Saturday in Game 3 in Orlando, first road game of these playoffs, a game that started off very close, and then I would say for a good 80-90% of it, Orlando was in that 5 to 10 point range in terms of their lead, and the Pistons would try to cut into it, and then there would be sloppiness, or they would go several possessions where they weren't getting good looks, and then the Magic, their lead ballooned all the way to 15 in the fourth quarter, and it felt like this thing was on ice. The crowd in Orlando was going nuts. It felt like the Pistons were, quite frankly, running out of gas. They have not been getting particularly productive minutes from their bench. I think their starters were starting to show some wear and tear down the stretch in this game. And then it felt like we were about to get the first definitive Cade Cunningham postseason moment. Now, keep in mind, Cade was not particularly efficient in Game 3. He was 8 for 23 from the floor, had a lot of turnovers. I think up to 8 turnovers for a point guard. And I'm not saying it's all his fault, and I will talk about that in just a second, but the Pistons actually took a lead in large part because Cade just took over that game. He reached that point that we saw him reach when this team played at Madison Square Garden earlier this year where, he was just in his bag. He was hitting step backs, he was driving and ones, making his free throws. And honestly, this was the moment where I felt like, wow, I think this might end up being serious because 90% of this game was Orlando's game. They were hitting timely shots. They were better on the glass. I felt like the Pistons, for a team that has been pretty open about wanting to be physical and has won with their physicality throughout the season, I feel like was getting, I'm not going to say dominated, but I feel like Orlando has been the much tougher team through these first 3 games, and it felt like the Pistons were about to steal one, and then late in that game, Franz Wagner took over. Orlando goes on a run. They ultimately pull away and win 113-105. Paulo Banchero had a 3-pointer that went off the back iron and went in. I don't know how that thing went in, and that officially put the game on ice. And so now the Pistons find themselves down 2-1 in the series. Look, I said after Game 1, and I don't think it was some ridiculous take, they were capable of losing this series. And look, I still have Pistons in 7. I think they win Game 4. I think they win Game 5, and then I think they're going to return back home and win Game 7. I think this has been a very competitive series, and it's going to continue to be. The Magic have been, and part of this is because of injuries, but a relatively inconsistent squad, especially offensively throughout the season. I have a hard time believing that in the first 4 games of this series, they're going to be able to maintain that offensive consistency in 3 of them. Something I feel like we'll have to give in Game 4. The Pistons officially have their backs against the wall. With that said, let's say the Pistons go on and win this series, which is entirely possible, and I'm still predicting them to do it. I think it's very fair to say that the flaws that exist with this team are very clearly worn on their sleeve. And I've seen a lot of people going after Jalen Duren. And understandably, the guy has been essentially a no-show in these playoff games outside of a solid second half, a much more effective second half in Game 2 against the Magic. And part of that does fall on him. Look, this is the second option on your team. This is a guy who was an all-star this year. This is a guy who's up for most improved player in the NBA this season. This is a guy who took a huge step forward, and he is a very good player. But when I watch this team go up against the Magic, and I see Jalen Suggs and Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner, I see three guys with length. I see three guys that can shoot. And I see three guys that are capable of creating off the dribble. And I think that what this series has exposed is the fact that, while it's not a poorly put together roster, it's not a bad roster, once you get past Cade, there's not many guys here that can create. And what that leads to has been Orlando just clogging the paint, knowing full well either Cade's got to facilitate and get the ball to other guys, or Cade's got to create on his own. And I think whether or not the Pistons go on to win this series, I think that is going to be the template for the remainder of this playoffs in terms of how to beat Detroit. Now, this isn't some magic secret that's just been unlocked necessarily. I mean, I think that even going back to the trade deadline, there's been concerns about the Pistons, maybe lack of shooting at points. Can they find that that second score that can create off the dribble? But I think that this group throughout the season, and in the regular season this works, found ways with their depth to do some pretty impressive things. You don't win 60 games on accident. And there were games when Cade was out, there were games when Duren was out, where they would use this bench and you'd have guys like Reed or Jenkins or LeVert, these guys coming off the bench and would play good games. In the postseason, this is where the men really get separated from the boys. And I think that we've seen this Pistons bench through 3 games in this series kind of be exposed. I mean, in Game 3 alone, you maybe got some good minutes out of Jenkins, but besides that, you look at this bench, nobody had more than 6 points off the bench, and that was Javonte Green that gave you 6. Jenkins gave you 5. Besides that, Paul Reed, relatively ineffective. Karis LeVert only plays 4 minutes. You know, Duren goes 3 for 10 from the floor. I mean, as a big man, that's about as pitiful as it gets. So there is absolutely a pathway for the Pistons to win this series, but, and I'm not the first person to point it out, your number 2 option needs to play better. And I think that affects everybody, because I noticed, and Cade was brilliant in the fourth quarter of this game, and is far from the biggest reason why the Pistons are trailing in this series, but I saw throughout the entirety of that game in Game 3 a version of Cade Cunningham that was trying to do a little bit too much. 27 points, great. 9 assists, great. You also had 9 turnovers. And I think this team, generally speaking, in Game 3 was doing a poor job of maximizing their possessions. I brought it up with Michigan basketball when they were at their worst, quote-unquote, which was pretty rare throughout the season. You know, nothing good comes from you not being able to get a shot off. And there was, I think, a point in the first quarter where it felt like they were trading baskets, and then all of a sudden I think the Pistons had 3 or 4 possessions in a row in which they turned the basketball over. So it's going to be a dogfight. It's going to be a dogfight, and regardless of how far this goes, I mean, the number of games in this series, you want to have fresh legs. And I think that when you look back, and I know it's forever ago, but when you look back at the Pistons in 2004 when they won it all, you know, that first series against the Bucks was a 5-game series. And I think that allowed them to kind of outlast the, at the time, New Jersey Nets in a 7-game series. Next, you know, it is a grind. You want to try to avoid getting into these, baseball terms, deep counts, but these deep series early on in the postseason, because those do have a residual effect the deeper you get into the playoffs. So it's a dogfight right now. They're in trouble. I don't think that the series is over, even if they lose Game 4, but this is, I think, already much scarier for Pistons fans than they projected coming into this thing. This is a real battle. All right, we will be back in just a second. We are going to bring Austin in. We're going to talk about the Detroit Tigers in segment number 2, and then segment number 3, we're going to discuss the Lions draft. Tigers, though, next segment, had a very mixed bag week. We'll talk about that in segment number 2. Segment number 2, and it's Tiger time. After another week in which they didn't have an off day, they are going to be off Monday, April the 27th, as they are traveling to Atlanta to take on a red-hot Braves team. But this week for the Tigers, 3-4, they played 2 full series on the last game of another one. They had that weird Monday 11 a.m. game against the Red Sox that they lost. They came back home, won 2 out of 3 against the Brewers, and then lost 2 out of 3 against the Cincinnati Reds. One of them stolen at the very last second after, I feel like nothing good happens after a rain delay. Games have a tendency to get pretty wacky, and that's exactly what we saw on Friday. But the Tigers still above 500, 15 and 14. They've played tremendous at home this year. After this series against Atlanta, they will come back home for I believe, a 6-game homestand where they play Texas and they play Boston. Boston, a team that's in total disarray right now after firing literally their entire coaching staff. But I want to focus on the Tigers here, and I brought this up in the post-game video that I made after the win on Sunday. And look, obviously you're going to have more optimism after a victory than you are after a loss. But here's what I'll say. I think that there are concerns after the first month of the season that are legitimate. I think that even though Vest was brilliant on Sunday, there is concern about the back end of the pen maybe not living up to the hype. There's very serious concern about the middle relief. The fact is this team is in a really tough spot if their starter isn't going 6 innings, because the guys that they have right now, maybe one of them develops into someone who's reliable, but between Seabold, who's now injured, and in turn now it's Hanafi or Drew Anderson, or DeJesus got sent down, you're not really feeling great about any one of those guys. The one thing I will say, though, I think I find myself on the more optimistic side of things, in large part because the one question mark that we all had, not just coming into this season, but in the latter part of last season, and the reason why things went so sideways in September last year, was what we saw, or in a lot of ways, what we didn't see from the offense. We saw too much swing and miss. We didn't see enough contact. We didn't see enough good at-bats in high-leverage situations. And a lot has changed, admittedly. Number one, and I'm just going to keep banging this drum until there's no reason to anymore, Kevin McGonigal is amazing. I mean, this is just ridiculous. Every single at-bat is like watching a work of art. It's amazing what he's doing right now. He is the best pure hitter on this team. I know we're only a month into the season, but right now, very early, this is a guy who might very well make the All-Star team as a rookie. I mean, this guy's that good. But when you look at some of the other numbers amongst the Avila guys, Carey, still a platoon guy, but hit for power, right? Had a nice game on Sunday, had a big-time home run on Friday. Riley Green has gotten on base at almost, over the last 8 games, almost a 500 clip. Dead serious. And that kind of snuck up on people, but the guy has been slugging. He's been drawing more walks. He's been more patient. Spencer Torkelson just set a franchise record, 5 consecutive games with a home run. His OPS has shot up from the low 600s to the low 800s now after just a week's worth of games. That's a great sign. Hit his first career walk-off home run on, I believe it was Thursday, against the Milwaukee Brewers. Look, these are guys that I focus on, and these are guys that I'm hard on, and the reason why I've been so critical of them is that their production often coincides with the team's success. Their lack of production often coincides with the team's failure. I don't have much concern at this point about Kevin McGonigal. I don't even have much concern about Cole Keith other than the inconsistency that comes with platooning him, playing him versus righties, playing him versus lefties, though worked out on Sunday with the Hyu Lee pinch hit home run. But those 3 guys, they make or break the lineup, in my opinion. And yes, there's been some stumbles with the pitching, but I look at where the pitching is at right now, and I think as we get deeper into the season, yes, there's going to be reinforcements. Verlander is going to come back, and Melton is in line to come back, and Job is in line to come back. And when that happens, maybe you see a Jack Flaherty move to the bullpen, and Flaherty will be probably a topic of discussion at some point here in the future as he continues to kind of crater. But I believe in the pitching's ability to fix itself. You got to keep in mind all relievers, even guys who've been around a long time like Kenley Jansen, have a relatively small sample size year in and year out. I mean, it's 1 inning at a time. What we came into this season concerned with is the offense, and the fact that Torkelson, Riley, and even Carey to a certain extent, this is maybe the best collectively that the 3 of them have been together. I don't know, maybe the start of last year was part of it, but I think a weird thing with these guys is that never feels like all 3 of them are seeing the ball particularly well at the same time. You take them, you add Glaber on top of that, you add McGonigal, you add Cole Keith, and of course Dingler, I know, who's been scuffling a little bit, but all of a sudden you're looking at a lineup that actually has some depth to it. We haven't even talked about what's going to happen in the future with Max Clark potentially getting called held up. We haven't even talked about the other platoon bats like Jahmai Jones, who've been swinging pretty well. I understand that you're not going to play every series at Great American Ballpark, but you also can't win every game 2-1, which is, I think, what this team has found a way to do more often than not at points over the last few seasons. You need that offensive production, and even outside of the counting numbers with the home runs and the RBIs, the thing that I'm just most excited about, and this is where you got to give Harris credit because he talked about this, it's more patience, it's more walks, and it's more contact without sacrificing the power that these guys have. So despite the fact that they find themselves only a game above 500, you got to keep in mind, look, they started the year 4-9. So you're looking at a team that is now 11-5 over their last 16 games. You play at that pace, I mean, you're going to dominate the league for a good chunk of the season. That Minnesota series feels more like an anomaly. You still want to be able to take one against Atlanta and come back home feeling pretty good about yourself. But as I stand on it right now, I actually find myself a little bit more optimistic than most. Austin, where do you stand? Because I did see a lot of people on social media this week and weekend that were very critical of the pitching and are legitimately concerned. Obviously, we can bring up Flaherty if we want, but am I crazy to be a little bit more on the optimistic side than some other people?
I don't think you are at all. I mean, I've said this time and time again. I really think this is a team that's going to run away with the division now once they get to the playoffs, if they do, which I think they will. We'll see what happens. There are a lot of good teams in the postseason, but I think this division is theirs to lose. Right now, they're only one game above 500. But one thing I want to say, man, is I'm really enjoying baseball right now. I mean, they won the series against the Brewers. They fell against the Reds, but these have been some entertaining games, man. Yeah. That one game against the Brewers where they came back and won. The game that they lost against the Reds where Lowe walked it off. That was one where, I mean, some people were annoyed by the rain delay, but you have, Kerry Carpenter coming in and hitting that go-ahead home run after Torque hits that home run, and Torque will be a point of discussion later in this show, but I'm really enjoying what I'm seeing right now. But of course, there are some reasonable areas of concern, and you've brought up Jack Flaherty, you've brought up the long relief, and that's definitely right now where I am most concerned. But I think that will sort itself out because we still have Troy Melton who's going to come back, still have Justin Verlander who's going to come back. You have some guys down in the minor leagues that I still like Sawyer Gipson-Long. We have not seen him yet this season, and I think he has something to offer. I think Jack Flaherty likely is going to be the guy that's going to be moved to the bullpen, once we start getting some of those guys back. But yeah, I mean, there's some things to be concerned about, but this is the most talent the Tigers have had in a really long time. This is the most well-rounded they've been in a really long time. Of course, you have some guys that we really like Dylan Dingler, who is now scuffling, but Riley Green is ascending. Spencer Torkelson, as you pointed out, he just set a franchise record with hitting home runs in 5 straight games, which is ridiculous. And Kevin McGonigal is just doing things that I can't even believe right now. Like, he is doing things that he's making history right now. Yeah. Like, you look back at some of the names that through, this point in the season that he's being compared to, you'll see like 2 guys who have done this in Major League history, like a guy from 1908 and a guy from 1956 or something like that. It's ridiculous, especially given his age and the modern age of baseball, because so many guys have, altered their game to, be selling out for power, be willing to sacrifice, strikeouts, the whole 3 true outcomes thing, and all of that. But I just, as somebody who grew up a hitter and loves hitting more than anything in sports, I absolutely love the way that he's battling, the approach that he has, the changes to his swing, what he's looking for, like even seeing him moving up in the box, depending on the pitch, just all those little things. And it is absolutely paying off for him right now. So yeah, the Tigers are only 1 game above 500. I think that's going to change, and they're playing really well at home right now. So once they come back, I expect that to continue. I think that the pitching will solve itself. It will get figured out as we start getting some of these guys back. But for the most part, I think you're completely right to be optimistic about this team, and I'm having fun watching this team right now.
That is a point, and you just made it. But I was talking about it with somebody earlier. Part of the identity of this club is they're going to play all 27 outs, and we've seen them battle back. I thought the comeback against Milwaukee after blowing the lead was incredibly impressive considering the caliber of bullpen they have. But this is, at least for the time being, this is going to remain one of the more entertaining teams in the league because I never feel like they're out of a game when they're losing. And in turn, I also never feel overwhelmingly confident when they're winning. So you kind of need to watch from beginning to end with this group. Hopefully the back end of that pen can be a little bit tighter. But yeah, as a whole, there are still good things happening. I think the schedule sets up with that home series, or those 2 home series coming up, for some good things to happen. And this is a great test. Going up against Atlanta, but not just going up against Atlanta. You go up against the Braves with Casey, Tarek, and Frommer, good to go. I mean, that's almost like a borderline playoff rotation in a lot of ways, with those guys set up the way they are right now. So that's it for segment number 2. We will be back at segment number 3 as we discuss a wild weekend in the NFL. It's draft season, and the Lions just had theirs. We will discuss the moves that Brad Holmes made over the weekend. A little teaser here. Feeling pretty good about what we saw. We'll be back in just a second. Segment number 3 here. It is Big Play Detroit. I'm Chris Castellani, joined by Austin Sisler. And now let's talk about the draft. The Detroit Lions, well, every team technically had a draft over this most recent weekend, but the Lions are the ones we're going to pay attention to here. Drafting 17th overall in the first round. And, maybe Austin, you can go a little bit more in depth on some of the later round picks. I'm just going to give, because I don't have an exact science to this stuff. I'm not going to come on here and say this guy's going to be great, this guy's going to be okay, this guy's not going to make it. I think with drafts, and I trust Detroit's player development more than I have really in any other time in history, I think with drafts, what you look for is your organization listening to the fans, and are they paying attention to what we're seeing? And therefore, are the holes that need to be addressed being addressed? And asking that question, I thought that this was a great weekend for Brad Holmes. And in turn, I thought that it was a great weekend for the Lions. Look, I think that there's been this general belief over the last calendar year, maybe a little bit longer, maybe even going back to the deadline in 24. There's been a certain sense of maybe arrogance that has kind of radiated off of Brad Holmes with deadlines, with drafts, with certain moves that he's made, free agent signings, of him believing that what they're doing is great and everything's going to work. And I mean, it became literally a meme on Lions Twitter of, we're good, which was kind of his quote last year when people knew that there were flaws in the offense. What did we come into this draft saying? We said they needed secondary help. We said that they needed to bolster things up in the trenches, rebuild their offensive line. And we said that they needed help at the edge rusher position. They needed someone to complement Hutch. The fact that you can come away from this draft having addressed, in theory, right? We'll see how these guys turn out. But having addressed every single hole that we had with this group, I think is remarkably impressive. Obviously, Blake Miller, Lions' first pick, number 17 overall in the first round out of Clemson. I'm not comparing him to Penei Sewell. I'm not saying that he's going to have the impact on the organization that Sewell did. But I like this pick so much in the same way that I liked the Sewell pick because it's intentionally unsexy. They didn't go out and get the explosive guy. They went out and they got the right guy. This team, when they were at their peak in 23 and 24, and when their offense was at their best even last season, they did it with an offensive line that dominated the trenches and protected their quarterback. You have lost too much over the last several years to run it back with that same O-line. The fact that you knew you needed to address this, it was there in the very first round. And, I obviously predicted McCoy, who, fell like crazy because of the knee issue. Like, that would have been the sexy pick. That would have been the pick that you go to and say, hey, this is the guy that's more explosive, ball-hawking cornerback, defensive back. We need that position. Obviously, there's some instability with the injuries. They didn't overthink it. And I'm not just saying this next part because of where he went to school. I love the Derek Moore pick. I mean, I adore the Derek Moore pick because I think that it is a move that has been in the works and has needed to happen for quite a while with Brad Holmes. And I think that for a long time now, we have known that this issue has existed with Hutch basically being the first and last line of defense with this defensive line, especially the pass rush. And while there have been rumors, whispers, whereabouts, what have you, I don't really think that any Lions fan has genuinely been expecting Max Crosby or a Max Crosby type player to line up across from Hutch on the defensive line. What we're looking for, and it's something that, I'll make the baseball analogy, Hutch is your ace. He's your number one pitcher on that O-line, right? What they need is not necessarily another ace. Go get a Framber Valdez. Give me a good number two. Give me a guy that can fill in, that can get to the quarterback, that's, got a quick first step, somebody that is going to hopefully make up for the fact and avoid having, Hutch dealing with double and even triple teams like we've seen over the last several years. And I think that there's an argument, and I'll talk more about this in our gambling segment. I think that there's a serious argument that could be made that over the last few years, some of these Michigan players, because of the tumult that existed within the program, especially with the coaching staff, maybe didn't have their potential maximized when they were in college. Moore was Michigan's best edge rusher last year for a defense that was good, but at points inconsistent. They weren't the best at getting to the quarterback. He had a phenomenal combine, a really good senior day or senior bowl. I think that this is a guy who's going to emerge. So I really love those picks. Obviously, you get another guy in Jimmy Rolder at linebacker in the 4th round. So I saw a take, and I forgive me, I can't remember who I saw it from, or else I'd cite my source. But somebody mentioned that they felt like the Lions rebuilt their identity in this draft. And look, I don't know if I can go as far as to say, hey, you know what? Now they're a Super Bowl contender and everything. But I think it shows as a evaluator of what this team needs. Brad Holmes still very much has his fastball. So, Austin, you can add to this, but I feel like the last 2 segments have just been, Mr. Glass half full. But genuinely, I'm very pleased with what I've seen, what I saw the Lions do over this weekend. I think they addressed the issues that they needed to address. We'll see how these guys develop. But in principle, I think that that's a great weekend for Brad Holmes.
Yeah, for sure. If I had to grade this draft, I would probably give it a B. The thing I'll say about it is I think this is probably the safest draft that Brad Holmes has had because, of course, compared to the other ones that he's had where he's knocked it out of the park with Jahmyr Gibbs, Brian Branch, Jack Campbell, Sam Laporta all in the same draft. Of course, he had additional draft picks in those drafts. And who knows, we might look back at this one and it might be equally as insane, if not more. I mean, that's a tough bar to top, but we'll see in these upcoming seasons. But I think that they were on a mission and they knew what spots they needed to fill, such as the offensive line, such as another edge rusher, such as linebacker and cornerback, and so on and so forth. The later picks, I could try to pretend like I know what I'm talking about with these guys, but for the most part, I really only saw their tape and would be going off of that. One thing, the couple areas where I'll criticize, and then I'll give Brad Holmes praise where he deserves it, other than just filling the needs. If Blake Miller was always their guy, I feel like they probably could have traded back and potentially gotten some more value and maybe another pick, maybe a 2nd round or 3rd round. Who knows what they could have gotten, because I think everyone thought they were going to get Monroe Freeling, and Monroe went like 2 picks later or something like that. So I think that was on the table. Of course, they did that and still wound up getting Gibbs a couple years ago. But as I said, I think that Brad was playing this one really safe and just trying to make sure they got their guys and they got their positions of need. The other one I'll say is you had in your mock draft, you wanted the Lions to get Jermod McCoy in the 1st round. Winds up falling to the 4th round is the first pick. I mean, he's still a talented guy. I think the Raiders got an absolute steal once he's healthy, and you've pointed out before that Brad Holmes doesn't have an issue drafting injured players or signing injured players. And I think that is a surefire way to get a steal. I think that at a certain point, once Jermod fell far enough, it was probably worth moving up for and trying to snag him. But either way, the Lions do wind up filling the cornerback position with Keith Abney II out of Arizona State, I believe. And I saw his tape. Dude is sticky. He's quick. I really like his intangibles. So at least you have a guy there. Of course, you are going to have Terrion Arnold back. Maybe Ennis Rakestraw is a really good cornerback. We don't know yet. They got him in the second round a couple of years ago. We still have yet to see what he can do, or over a prolonged period of time at least. But Derek Moore, you mentioned you really loved that pick, and I agree. Even as a Spartan fan, I really like that pick as well. I think outside of the top few edge rusher names, if they weren't going to get one of those top few guys that were going to go in the like top 15 picks or something, Derek Moore was definitely the guy that I was looking at, like if they were going to get someone in the second round or so. So I'm definitely glad that they got him. I think he can be a guy that gets roughly 10 or so sacks a year, can be that good number 2 to Aiden Hutchinson, as you mentioned, and will be quick enough to be able to force the quarterback back to Aiden Hutchinson's side, or be able to sack the quarterback if Aiden Hutchinson chases him out of the pocket, and will be able to get outside to force running backs back inside, which is something that the Lions just consistently have not had over these last few years. So all in all, I think it was a very safe draft. I think they filled what they needed. Hopefully some of these guys turn out to be stars. Brad Holmes has proven year in and year out that he can find stars, and I'm excited to see what these guys can do.
Yeah, I think we're at a point in the Lions' development, and if you want to say window, whether it's open, closed, what have you, where safe is not a bad thing. I think that safe simply means addressing the issues that you need to address without doing anything too ridiculous. And I agree. I didn't see that many mocks that had Blake Miller as high as 17. And I guess that's a fair point. Like, if there's one detriment, it's that maybe you overshot a little bit there. Maybe you could have traded down or waited a little bit. That's fine. But as a whole, I would so much rather you do what they did than slip up and you end up with nothing type of thing, where you wait around and maybe he'll be available in the next round, then somebody takes him. I think generally speaking, the organization as a whole was pretty pleased with the draft that they just had. So I'm sure before we know it, training camp will be around the corner. All right, we will be back for Austin's I'll Say This segment in segment number 4. And we're going to talk about a guy, the aforementioned Spencer Torkelson, who is in the midst of the best week of his career, and we will discuss that when we return. This is Big Play Detroit. All right, Big Play Detroit, we are back, and it is time for our I'll Say This segment. Austin, per usual, going to be running point on this one. I'll hand it over to you, and then I'll just kind of add my 2 cents in at the end. Let's discuss it. Austin, what do you got for our I'll Say This segment?
I'll say this. 2026 will make or break Spencer Torkelson. Now, there's so many different directions I could go with this, but let me start out by saying this. Spencer Torkelson makes me sad. He makes me sad because he was the number 1 overall pick in a time where, the Tigers were so bad for so long. And I bought minor league baseball TV to watch guys like Torkelson and Mize and Skubal in the minors because I couldn't stand watching the Tigers on-field product. This is a guy that broke Barry Bonds' I believe it was either his freshman record or his single season record for home runs at Arizona State. Yeah. Had the most insane college highlight reel I have ever seen. And then he gets to the big leagues, is supposed to take over for Miguel Cabrera, has one of the worst historically rookie seasons in the history of the game. And even over these past few years, he's developed and he's continually gotten better. He's proven he can be a run producer. Multiple 30 home run seasons, multiple seasons getting over 90 RBIs. One of them he got over 100 RBIs. But he's not very efficient. His OPS, despite how much power he has, is consistently low. And this is a guy that, I think if he gets to free agency and has these types of numbers that he's had over the last handful of years, Scott is probably going to look at him and not think he is worth the price to keep him around. And somebody will probably overshoot on him. This is a guy that, before the analytics era, would have gotten a monster bag just because of how many runs he drives in. But he struggles so much, especially in run scoring positions. When he has runners in scoring position, his numbers, he doesn't just choke in those positions. They are unbelievably bad. I don't know. I don't have his averages or the numbers offhand, but it's more than just he's not able to step up to the moment. And that kind of leads me to believe that there is room for growth here. We're already seeing some growth from him outside of just, hitting home runs in 5 straight games. I mean, that's all great, but where are the areas that we're seeing steps forward? Of course, there was the whole stance change last year or so, or maybe it was the year before, I can't remember at this point. People made a big deal about that, and it did seem to make some minor adjustments. But then you also look at his chase rate. That is lower than it has been in his entire career. It's dropped significantly. So that is a plus. I think that he will get better in run scoring opportunities, especially as we have guys now in the big leagues like Kevin McGonigal, who's doing what he's doing. Dingler is stepping up. You'll probably have Max Clark here pretty soon. And so the lineup is going to have a lot of really solid hitters, and the pressure is going to be off of him a little bit. And we saw what that did to a guy like Javier Baez the year before, wound up making the All-Star team, had offensive numbers at least good enough to make him a playable player. And I think that we might see something similar to that with Spencer Torkelson. I mean, people dog on him so much, and a lot of it is deserved, but it's also low-hanging fruit. And I'm the guy that every single time he steps up to the plate, in my head, I'm like, all right, prove them all wrong, prove me wrong, prove everybody wrong. Because the dude, he has a beautiful swing. He is very athletic, and when he hits baseballs, he absolutely destroys them. And it's a thing of beauty to watch when he does. Got his first walk-off home run in his career this past week, which was a great thing to see. And I mean, I don't expect him to keep up the pace that he's on right now, but I hope that this builds some momentum for him to carry it, throughout the season. But back to my point about 2026 will make or break him and his future with the Detroit Tigers. As I said, I don't think Scott Harris would want to keep him around if his numbers stay kind of where they're at right now, especially the OPS and things like that. And you've mentioned, and I believe in your most recent post game, that he struggles a lot just hitting pitches that are right down the middle, which is a bizarre thing to see out of a guy that was as hyped as he was. Something that I've said to you before is I feel like he was just so naturally talented that I don't know how much he's had to develop over the course of his life. He was probably able to just crush every single level of baseball he has ever played and not change that much. Major League Baseball is different. And we are starting to see, out of Casey Mize at least, a guy develop and look a lot better, a bunch of years into his Major League career at this point. I wasn't expecting that at all, but it's happening. Of course, different guys, different positions. You got a pitcher and a hitter. But you never know. Maybe he will be able to take steps forward. And if he's able to, get that OPS consistently or well enough over 800, and he is able to start coming up in clutch positions this season, which he hasn't in years prior, maybe this is a guy that Scott Harris will think is worth keeping around rather than moving Keith over to first base or leaving first base open so Dingler can slide in there at points. I think this is a season where he has to prove what he's worth to the Detroit Tigers.
I would agree. I think that there is, and look, obviously over this last week, it's changed a lot. But I think one thing to pay attention to is the fact that he is in a situation where if he were to bottom out, he could get non-tendered. And the fact is, Lorenzo and Briseño and Colt Keith are all 3 guys capable of playing first base at some point in the future. You're going to have a traffic jam. Now, in an ideal world, Torque just sticks around. But this weekend and these last 5 days have been fascinating because I've been open about the fact that I've just kind of given up on the star that I thought Torkelson was going to be coming out of ASU. But, man, it's when you start hitting mistakes all of a sudden and you see the way the ball's flying off his bat and the confidence and the bat flips, you crack open that window just a little bit. Now, the Javi comp that you made, I think, is very fair, and I wrote about it with Torque before the season. There are some guys that benefit from being a guy as opposed to the guy. And quite frankly, when I watch this lineup and the at-bats that these guys are putting together, McGonigal is the guy. I mean, that's the guy in this lineup that everyone's going to be paying attention to. I'm not saying he's to this level, but in the same way that every Yankees fan and player looks at Aaron Judge when he comes to bat. You know, like I think he is kind of at the forefront of this thing, kind of the point guard of this offense. And if Torque can just be the guy that mashes, great. For some reason, and I wish I could figure it out, this guy is historically bad in certain situations. Like he's, 3 for 30 career with the bases loaded. I don't think he's drawn a walk, like just baffling numbers. You know, when you start to, the thing is, we remember moments as fans more than the counting totals. And if he can start to have more moments like he had over this most recent weekend, fans' perception of him is going to take a turn. And I think his production, I brought it up with Green and Carpenter as well, but especially with him and his ceiling as a power hitter, it changes the trajectory of this offense. So it'll be interesting to see. The door is kind of cracked open for him, and he's earned that. He had an unbelievable week, historic week in a lot of ways. We'll be back. We're going to cover, it's Fact or Fiction time. We're going to be talking a little bit of college basketball, and it's going to be something that people are going to be mentioning from now until we get to next April, and it's the fact that the Final Four is right in our backyard next year, and Michigan and Michigan State both hope to be there. We'll discuss that here in just a second. All right, we are back for our Fact or Fiction segment. Austin, throw it my way. A little college basketball talk. What do you got for today's Fact or Fiction?
Fact or Fiction, Michigan and Michigan State will both make the 2027 Final Four in Detroit.
Okay. It's interesting because obviously, and one thing we're leaving out, Michigan added some transfers this week. Michigan State added a transfer. Michigan also, I think, in preparation for these moves, knew that Merez Johnson, Adai Mara will both be going pro. I would imagine both of them will stay in the draft. I don't know what else they could really improve on in college that's really required. I mean, we even saw Mara making some threes towards the end of the season. I think that these guys' games are, for what the players they want to be, are relatively polished. Michigan goes out, they add a few more pieces. They add the 7-footer from, or I think 7'2", guy from Cincinnati. You add a power forward from LSU, a former top recruit. So they're going to be fine. But look, with Michigan State, I'm sorry, I'm not even, I guess it is pessimistic. I'm going to say no. So the answer to this is no. I don't see both of them doing it. Because with Michigan State, I still see, up to this point, some very serious concerns with the shooting, whether it's a mid-range shooting or outside shooting. And, yeah, you have a great facilitator. I mean, a tremendous facilitator in Jeremy Fears, who, to his credit, improved quite a bit as a jump shooter this season. But, you know, when you look at last year when they were making shots, who was it that was making shots? Well, Devine came along for a minute. Kohler was probably, at least for a time, their best outside shooter from a percentage standpoint. Both those guys are gone. Devine in the portal, Kohler graduated. You know, where's the outside shooting going to come from? And while there has been a lot of talk about this this recruiting class, I look at incoming recruiting classes a lot differently than I used to, because the fact is a 5-star freshman is nowadays not nearly as valuable as a 1 or 2 year guy that you can grab in the portal. Like Yaxel Lendeborg was the top rated guy in the portal last year. Every program in the country would have rather had Yaxel Lendeborg as an established product like he was going into Michigan over a 5-star high school recruit. You know, and that's not to say these guys are going to end up being bad players. I mean, Trey McKinney, prime example, but it's just, I think that the game has changed. The landscape has changed so much where I don't pay as much attention to that. I don't think it's as important. On the other side, you have Michigan, and look, I think with the resources they have, with the coach they have, but even beyond that, with his roster construction and his evaluations, I think Michigan will probably be consistently ranked in the top 10 for preseason for a good chunk of Dusty May's tenure. One point I just want to bring up, and it wouldn't shock me at all if they put together a group that's back in the Final Four next year, and it would be a ton of fun because it would be in Detroit. But last year's Michigan team, which I'll be talking about from now until forever, and why not, it's not just how talented they were. It's the fact that you put together a team of some of the most unselfish players in college basketball. You had probably about 6 or 7 guys on that group that could have been the guy anywhere. And some of them came off the bench for you. And on any given night, it was somebody else. There were no egos offensively or defensively on this club. And that's not to say that the culture here isn't going to continue to be great, because I'm sure it will. But year in and year out, it's just hard for me to expect that it's going to be this good all the time. There are going to be stumbling blocks. There are going to be those guys that you pick up in the portal that you think highly of that don't emerge the way that you want them to. Now, I say this, and we could be recording this a year from now and celebrating back-to-back titles. I mean, I don't know. But it's also worth pointing out, and just from a historical standpoint, Michigan and Michigan State have never played in the same Final Four. The closest that they've ever been was 2014 when Michigan State lost to UConn. MSU 4 seed, UConn a 7 seed, goes on to win the whole thing. Michigan loses essentially at the buzzer on the Aaron Harrison 3. Michigan was a 2 seed then. Kentucky was an 8 seed. Obviously last year Michigan wins it all. Michigan State in the Sweet 16. 2013 Michigan in a national championship. Michigan State in the Sweet 16. So they've kind of been around, but it would take a lot. Right now, when I look at the landscape of college basketball, as well as from Michigan's standpoint, the difficulty that is repeating in college basketball. I know UConn just did it. There's been 2 teams that have done it in the 21st century, obviously the other being Florida. In the current age, UConn is the only one that has done it. So I'm going to say no. It would be an unbelievable story, and just to back up, to kind of give you the reverse trump card here in terms of history. Last time it was here, Michigan State was there. And Michigan State, that was the last time Tom Izzo won a Final Four game, was when they made it to the national championship. They knocked off UConn and then ultimately lost to that loaded UNC team. So I would say Michigan and Michigan State have about as high a chance of being the host teams of a Final Four as any program has had in a long time, or programs have had in a long time. But March is nothing if not unpredictable, and with the current landscape being what it is, it's harder, I think, to really evaluate what rosters are going to look like and how guys are going to gel, given how many portal pickups and one-year guys get kind of plugged in. So it'll be interesting, but it's going to be something worth watching, and it's going to be something that we're going to be talking about, because it would be a heck of a story. All right, we will be back with our final segment, gambling segment, coming up, brought to you by FanDuel. We have a little Derek Moore action. Sprinkle something on that. Potential defensive rookie of the year, ? We'll be right back, and we will wrap it up here on Big Play Detroit. FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. That's right. Turn $5 into $250 in bonus bets just for getting started. And when every possession matters in the playoffs, we got NBA playoffs coming up. That includes the Detroit Pistons locked into that 1 seed. FanDuel makes it very easy to get closer to the action. From player props on your favorite stars to all the tools you need to back them up, FanDuel puts player research right at your fingertips so you can check stats, trends, and matchups all in one place and make your picks with confidence. It's everything you need all in one app. So don't miss your shot. Head to FanDuel.com/BigPlay to get started. FanDuel. Play your game. Ages 21 up for select states for Kansas in affiliation with Kansas Star Casino. 18 plus in D.C., Kentucky, Wyoming. First online real money wager only. $5 deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets, which cover 7 days after receipt. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER, 1-800-MY-RESET. Call 1-888-789-7777. Visit ccpg.org/chat. For Connecticut, visit mdgamblinghelp.com. For Maryland, visit gamblinghelpma.org. Call 800-327-5050. Massachusetts, call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY. Text HOPE-NY for New York. And call 1-877-770-7867 for Louisiana. Final segment here for Big Play Detroit, and it is our gambling segment. And I was looking at some odds on FanDuel, and I tried to, because this is Big Play Detroit, try to find something that is a unique bet based around a Detroit athlete or team. And we spent our time in segment number 3 talking about the Lions draft, and one guy that I mentioned was Derek Moore, but I'm going to figuratively put my money where my mouth is by discussing this, because the current odds on FanDuel for Derek Moore to win Defensive Rookie of the Year are plus 12,500. I think if my math is correct on that, that's 125 to 1 for Derek Moore, the 44th overall pick in this year's draft out of Michigan. For those odds, I really like that. And this is not me speaking as a fan of the Lions. This is not me necessarily speaking as a fan of Michigan. This is me bringing up the fact that very often, it's not always, but with these rookies in their first year or two, where you are drafted is more important than when you are drafted. Because often, if you are a rookie and you go, like Fernando Mendoza going to the Raiders aren't any good. And so Mendoza could put up good numbers this season, but is the offensive line going to protect him? You know, Joe Burrow is a prime example of that. Joe Burrow's rookie season comes out like gangbusters, looks great, has no offensive line, gets beat up, tears up his knee. You know, I think, and it's something that I'm going to be focusing on all this offseason and into next season. I really think that the Lions have found a perfect complement to Aiden Hutchinson. And for that reason, it wouldn't shock me if Derek Moore ends up putting up better sack numbers than a lot of people are going to anticipate, because you finally have somebody on the other end of that defensive line that you have to worry about. I also think, and we've seen multiple reports of this over the last few weeks, when you look at where certain Michigan guys went, obviously Rolder going in the 4th round to the Lions, you had Marlon Klein very surprisingly going to the Texans in the 2nd round after what I thought was a pretty underwhelming year for Marlon Klein, quite frankly. But I think that there's this general belief that the coaching staff really held some of these guys at Michigan back a year ago from reaching their full potential. Moore had a phenomenal senior day. I think shot up draft boards, has an ability to consistently get to the quarterback. If you're looking for odds of anybody that the Lions just drafted, I'd maybe take a flyer out on that, because I think given the lack of production that's existed on this defensive line outside of Aiden Hutchinson over the last few years, he's going to slide in right away and be ready to go. And I think that one guy is going to be able to help the other. I think the having that veteran presence of Aiden Hutchinson, a guy who's probably going to see some double, even triple teams. On the other side, you got Derek Moore, I think, who's going to be able to take care of business. This is something to pay attention to. I actually think odds-wise, I mean, that's pretty remarkable for a guy of his talent. So something to look into. That is what I have. 125 to 1 on FanDuel. Of course, if you are going to bet, go to use the FanDuel Sportsbook. And that is going to do it for today's show. Let's get our plugs out of the way, and I'll plug Austin here as well. You can follow me on Twitter at Castellani2014. You can find Big Play Detroit on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Appreciate all of your support. TikTok at Chris Castellani, Instagram at ChrisCastle95, and pretty much all the content that Austin and I create beyond Big Play can be found at CastellaniContent.com. Right now, we're obviously 29 games into the Tiger season. You want to get caught up on all 29 Tiger videos? Well, they can be found at CastellaniContent.com. They are archived, and you can watch all of last season's videos as well. I really like having that kind of backlog there, because sometimes people ask me questions about, you know, do you remember when you said this? And because of my weird savant memory, I have a tendency to remember it, and now you can find it at CastellaniContent.com. Austin Sisler, you can find him at Austin Sisler on Twitter/X. His link tree is also on there as well, and you can find the links to all the stuff that he works on independently and all the stuff that he works on with me, per usual. And as always, I greatly, greatly appreciate his presence on this show and his presence as my producer, as we are now over a month into this, and we've greatly enjoyed it. We're working every single week to try to improve the product, and Austin is a big part of that. But, you know, I'm going to say it every week. The people at Big Play have been really good to us. They've allowed us a lot of creative freedom, and we haven't heard much negative feedback feedback, which I like to believe is a good thing. So greatly appreciate the audience. Make sure you're subscribing on YouTube. This will be the last point I make, is that our retention rate up to this point has actually been quite high, which is great. When people watch, they stay around. Next step is making sure that we can continue to grow the subscribers and continue to build off the ad revenue that we already have, and you guys are a big part of that. So we'll be back next week with another show. Greatly appreciate y'all. I will talk to you guys again real soon. Have a great rest of your week. Peace and happiness.